Okay, we got an interesting topic today. Thank you so much for joining me. We're going to be talking about why the red pill community is becoming so popular on YouTube. And this is just my theory. I am not a social scientist, but I do have an education. I have research skills. I have been doing research for the past week and a half. 2 weeks actually. I have a book that I am currently reading, and so I'm just going to apply some of that knowledge. And I will be doing more videos about this, just to go further in detail and to address certain questions regarding this. But I was not aware of the red pill community until 2 months ago. That was my first exposure to the red pill community. I had no idea they existed. And I call the red pill community the dark corner of the internet, because when I watch this content, you know, I categorize my content in two different ways, and I'm being even pickier. It's like I'm getting deeper in my faith and, you know, really reassessing and what things work for me or feed my spirit, and affirm God, and the things that do not. So I'm separating my content a lot more from the things of the world versus the things of God. And to be honest, I'm trying to say this in a nice way, in a very polished way. The red pill community did not affirm me as a woman. It didn't make me feel encouraged. It didn't make me feel like I had learned anything new. If anything, I felt like it was just reinforcing certain stereotypes about what it means to be feminine, what it means to be masculine, and it is encouraging narcissistic behavior. I will get into that a little bit later in the video. So essentially, if you're not familiar with red pill comes from this idea that human beings are living in the world delusional. They're not looking at things from a realistic situation. So the red pill is like a daily dose of truth, a harsh truth that will give you a different perspective and change your philosophy or your perspective on the way that you engage the world. So ideally, the red pill would be a good thing if you're just basing it off the definition, because you're exposing someone to truth. You're exposing someone to something that can help them, that will enlighten them. And sometimes the truth is scary. But what I'm seeing a lot from the red pill community is a place where men are expressing their hatred or their dissatisfaction with society, women in particular. And I believe that the red pill community is cropping up, and this may be controversial. It probably is very controversial. I think the red pill community is popping up in the attitudes that we're seeing towards men, and the violence and this massive display of masculinity that we're seeing on the internet is a result of feminism. Now, I will make it very clear, and this is not because I am against anyone. I am not a feminist. I used to call myself a feminist when I was in high school, when I was, early college years. But by the time I was a junior in college, I had done a lot of critical race studies. I had done a lot of, historical studies to understand the full nature of what it meant when someone identifies as a feminist. And I had realized that that's not something that aligns with me or my goals or my beliefs. On a fundamental level, I agree with a lot of things that feminism speaks too, but I do not agree with the movement. I don't agree with the way that the movement is going about things. And I encourage anyone, before you just follow a social movement because it looks good on the outside, and I have been blind and in the moment too, especially in my passion, to sometimes just hop on the bandwagon of something and hashtag it, and then I'll look more into it and I'm like, that doesn't align with my beliefs at all. Like, not spiritually, not on a religious level, not as a person. So I encourage you to do your research before you just hop on any bandwagon. Even being a feminist, you can believe in more rights for women without being a feminist, which is where I align. So let's talk about feminism, because a lot of people are not even familiar with the history of feminism and how it really started. If you trace feminism in the United States, they dated back to mid-19th century with the Seneca Falls Convention, and there were two women who basically called a meeting, and I think it was over about 200 women, and that meeting was to talk about the rights and the grievances of women. And essentially, the first wave of feminism, women were frustrated that they didn't have any political rights. Women were upset that they were not able to vote, that they weren't able to run for political office, or they didn't hold political office positions of high stature. And so women wanted more rights. They wanted more of a buy-in on the system. And that makes total sense, right? If you live and engage with the society every single day, you're going to want people at the top who reflect you. So women saw, like, we don't have anybody who looks like us, who's making decisions for us. We don't like that. Very normal. Women eventually did get the right to vote. Let me state this first. White women did. Black women and other women of color had to fight for a long time after white women in this country to get the rights to vote. And after women got their right to vote, I believe it was in 1919 or 1920, white women just got radio silent. And they were like, we did our job. We are able to vote now. Let's focus on us and our issues. And then you really have this quiet period. And it's not that women weren't fighting for women's rights, but the shift had the focus had shifted in terms of what white women were fighting for. Black women were still on the front lines fighting for the right to vote, because they were combating, racism, extreme poverty, Jim Crow, those kinds of things. So that's why Black women, we're a little busy. We were a little busy in the past. So, and we're still busy now. So let's make that clear. But we as women, Black women and white women had a very different history in the United States. In the 1960s, there was an author who wrote The Feminist Mystique, and I cannot remember the author. Sorry, high school U.S. history teacher. I cannot remember the author, but she basically wrote a book called The Feminist Mystique, and in it she discussed a lot of the grievances of white women. And the reason I specify white women in this is not because I have an issue with white women. I mean, I do have some issues with the privilege, but other than that, I don't have an issue with white women. My main issue is that white women, Black women, Latino women, Asian women had very different experiences in the United States. It was very typical for Black women to work. I remember when I was in high school, I did this project on, our family history. And I remember all the white people in my class were like, yeah, my grandma, my great grandma, my aunts, they were all stay-at-home moms, and my mom's a stay-at-home mom. And I literally called my grandma, asked my aunts, pretty much Black women, the lineages, we worked. Even if our husbands worked and were paid for a majority of the bills in the household, Black women have worked. Historically in the U.S., whether that was through in the enslavement period, after enslavement, all the way in the 20th century, and even now today, Black women have always worked in their households. Black women never got an easy ride in America. Black women never just sat on our big butts, or not so big butts, depending on what you got, and did nothing. Black women have always carried weight in America. And so Black women have never had the opportunity to write something like a feminist mystique, where they just complained about the simple fact that they had to be housewives. Now, I say complain because a lot of times women in history used to compare their grievances. White women have been comparing the plight of white women to slavery and the struggles of Black people. That's not something new, which I'll post a picture. That's something they did all the way back in slavery. White women said if they can't vote, they might as well have been on a plantation, which I was like, whoa there, ma'am. Whoa. Not the same at all, okay? You being mad that you can't vote is not the same as literally being enslaved and being counted as 3/5 of a person and potentially having your children being sold to a different plantation for money. I mean, there's just so much in there that was toxic. I am not even going to pretend no, we don't do that, sweetie. Let's not do that. So white women, I'm not going to say they've never had any struggles in America. I definitely think that women in general are oppressed no matter what race, but there's levels to this oppression, okay? And so Black women and white women and Latino women and Asian women, they've all had very different struggles. We all have different struggles. There's some things we relate to, but a lot of the stuff, very different experiences, and it's all based on the color of our skin. So the second wave of feminism, which pretty much took root in the 1960s and 70s and kind of morphed into this more radical form of feminism, were women fighting against this thing called a cult of domesticity. And the cult of domesticity is this idea that in middle class and in higher social classes that women were stuck to these domestic lifestyles. And so a lot of women didn't like that. They said, hey, I am not just meant to be somebody's trophy wife and to pick up the latest version of the vacuum from the store and to make honey baked hams. I have other things to do. I am smart. I have a brain. I maybe don't want to have kids. And then as radical forms of feminism begin to take root, which made the pathway for the third wave of feminism, radical forms of feminism were women fighting against this idea at all that they had to be feminine. And that's really the root of the gender war that we're seeing today, because women have fought, not all women, because a lot of women through radical forms have fought for this idea that who says as a woman they need to look a certain way, they need to act a certain way, they need to think a certain way. That opened doors. And also the sexual revolutions that have taken place throughout this time, where the traits for both genders have become a little bit more homogenous. Like men and women in what's considered masculine and feminine are not as distinguishable anymore, because you could have a male or a man who exhibits masculine traits or feminine traits, and you can have a woman who exhibits masculine traits. And that's even demonstrated in the workplace, right? Even though psychologically as humans we do take to that very differently, there has been a fight all the way since the 70s with radical forms of feminism to challenge this whole notion of what a gender even is supposed to look like and what's supposed to mean. A lot of people don't like that. A lot, especially men. And men said, hey, like, our whole lives we're raised to be masculine, we're raised to think a certain way, and then all of a sudden we're expected to just think a totally different way because someone says they don't want to feel that way. That's part of the issue with what's happening and what we're seeing with the transgender movement, is that people are struggling they're raised with these traditional ways of thinking, and then all of a sudden they're an adult and they're expected to understand and demonstrate a level of empathy that's never been required of them before. That's kind of what's happening with men. And then you get to the third wave of feminism. And the third wave of feminism, which is really attributed to the 90s, and even up until, I would say there's some remnants of it now in the fourth wave of feminism that we're seeing also. And that I believe we're probably heading towards a fifth wave of feminism, because we just continue to morph into different forms of feminism in the United States, especially. The third wave of feminism was this idea that a woman should be free to express herself sexually in any way that she chooses. That there was the whole idea of, if I dress a certain way, if I speak a certain way, if I, do certain things, it should not determine who I am, my value, my virtue as a woman. And just forget that whole idea, right? So this is the issue. Women are going through all of these changes socially, psychologically. We're being conditioned to think differently. We're blurring the lines of what a difference between a man and a woman in a lot of ways. And of course, no society changes overnight. So there's still going to be some social conditioning where you still have some idea of what it means to be a girl, what it means to be a boy, and those things carry with us. Even though some of those things are natural. Some of the differences between boys and girls are completely and totally natural, and we can't ignore that. But some of it is just, and a lot of it is through social conditioning. There's been all these changes with women that there haven't been with men. There haven't been any movements with men specifically, led by men, to challenge hetero and homosexual men. That's the problem. So now you have this new version of a woman, a majority of men who are raised with traditional or somewhat traditional values for masculinity. So, what are masculine traits as we know it? That goes into a lot of things. A feminine trait, we always think of feminine as soft, as pretty, as delicate, as light, bright, nurturing, warm, composed. All of those different things. Those are feminine traits. When we think of masculine traits, we think of aggressive, hunter, a go-getter, someone who is goal-oriented, someone who is mature and wise. And we think about all of that different stuff. And in a lot of ways, emotionally unavailable, but we'll call it composed or stoic for people's egos. And so those are all the traits of a man, right? A woman is emotional, a man is logical. Which I can make a whole video about that, because that's just absolutely not true. And so that's the whole idea. A woman being feminine is a woman being emotional and just falling into her femininity and being quiet and receiving. And as a man, if you're masculine, you are constantly giving. And so when you have a world where that dynamic is shifting and women are saying, I don't want to receive, I don't want to be quiet, I don't want to just sit behind, I can make my own money, I can make as much money as you, there's a bunch of men who feel displaced. These men feel like, what am I supposed to do as a man? If I've been raised as a man that my job was to take care of my family, to make enough money, to make something of myself, to not be lazy, that I'm supposed to be aggressive in some ways. Like if I want something, to go out there and get it, to fight for my family, to fight for the girl that he wants. If men have been taught that, and then all of a sudden they get in a society where, I don't mean to discredit or to invalidate anyone's experiences, but a lot of men have told me that they feel uncomfortable flirting with women because they automatically get treated or regarded as creepy. So you have men who are being told that there's something wrong with the very way that they've been raised to be their entire lives. Feminism did that, because when you have society changing for women, but you don't have a society where it's changing for men. And there have been positive changes for men in ways too, but that's mostly been led and spearheaded by women. When you see all these movements that's like, men can be open, men can cry, men can talk about their feelings, it's women opening that door. It'd be much more powerful for men if other men open that door a lot more as well. Instead, you see a lot of men who uphold that locker room talk or that masculinity, and so it makes it a very uncomfortable place when we talk about these kinds of things. So I feel like that is why this red pill community is popping up. Because you have men who are saying, we're going to reestablish the order of things because it's gotten out of control and women are getting delusional. And I think that there are some things that the red pill community says are absolutely true, but it's rooted in traditional ways of thinking. Which, what I mean by traditional, I mean it could have been passed down for the past 100 years. It doesn't mean that it's always been that way, because I think we use natural or the nature of things as a cop-out sometimes. Humans are incredibly adaptive, which means if you put them in different environments, they're going to do things to try to survive. And so when you find a person and they're put in a new environment, it's not the assumption maybe is that men are going to see the modern woman or the woman that she is today, and they're going to totally understand it, and then the world's going to make sense and everyone's going to be happy. But there are rules, and there are ways that society functions based off of how we've been raised and conditioned and what's naturally in us as women and men and how we respond to things. And so when you change a system or you change half of that system, of course men are going to respond. And if women are trying to blur the gap between masculinity and femininity, I think it makes total sense that men's response to masculinity is by being more dominant, by being more aggressive, by being even sometimes more violent. I'm not saying it's justified. I'm not saying that it's right. But I think that if you change structures, that's exactly what happens. I think about this when I think about the structures of racism. I think about what's happened with Donald Trump. And I think about what's happened with his entire cohort and his supporters. And we saw all of these instances of racism being pushed out to the forefront. And it's because for years you had a group of people who did not feel seen and heard and validated, and they felt like the world around them was changing. And they were raised with a certain set of values, albeit those set of values are racist, or they are sexist, or they are outdated views or whatnot. No matter what my political beliefs or affiliations are, on a human level, I can understand that people are stakeholders in a system. And so if people who benefit from the privilege of racism or from Midwestern life, or who benefit from a certain particular set of beliefs because that's where their whole world is colored, when there is a reaction against that, or there is a movement against that, they're going to be protective over it. If you've ever been in any environment, there are people who are used to the past way of doing things and people with the new way of doing things. If you ever worked at a job and they got new management, somebody's going to love the new management. And then somebody's going to be like, oh, but that's not the way we did it at my old job. That's not the way we did it with the old boss. That's how life goes. People are used to things. People get used to systems. And even though humans are incredibly adaptive to those systems, we still have expectations and the way that our world works. And so when someone's world is being shaken up and they're told that that world operates in a completely different way than they've been raised, that is a shocker for them. That's why older generations struggle to understand newer generations and the rhetoric of newer generations. That's why people just have a stake in the system. Men have a stake in male privilege. Men have a stake in patriarchy. This is the way things have always been. And I'm not going to say all things are bad, because not every single thing is bad when it comes to patriarchy. Like, for some women, for example, if you're a traditional woman, and you want to marry a man who wants to take care of his family, and you just want to be a housewife, which I'm never going to demean housewives, because they say that's what you want to do and you're a traditional woman. Well, the idea that women have to go into society and work and have equal value of men when it comes to the financials in the family, that system doesn't benefit you. That's not what you want. So of course you're going to have a natural reaction against women who are fighting for that, because you don't agree at all. The thing we have to recognize is there's no system in this world that's ever going to benefit every single human being, an individual. That's impossible. Someone's always going to be unhappy. Someone's experience is always going to be different. With men, men have a stake. That's how they've been raised. That's what gives them their confidence. And I think it does have to do to the nature of men sometimes. Like, men need to feel like they can protect. Men need to feel, it causes pressure, not gonna lie. A lot of men struggle with mental health for the very reasons and the expectation and pressure that's been put on them. But sometimes I wonder if the roles had been reversed and it was flipped. And instead of there being a feminist movement, there was a movement of men who said, we don't want to be the ones to have to take care of the family by ourselves. It's too much pressure. It's too much stress. It's emotional. It's causing us emotional turmoil. It's wearing us down and breaking us down. I wonder how the conversation would have turned. I wonder if women would have said, no, this is the way things always have been. I wonder if there would have been red pill channels with communities of women talking about how men don't do what they're supposed to do and how men are supposed to provide for the family and they don't want to. That's why you're starting to hear this conversation of men saying, why do women want to only be taken out? Why do women only want to be cooked for? Why do women want all the men to make all the money? Why does a woman just want to sit down and have a man take care of her all day? Why does she deserve that? According to the rules of masculinity and femininity, that's a very feminine conversation to have. To complain as to why you have to be the one to give everything. It's so traditional. Men would just be like, well, that's a man's responsibility. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if I'm a high value man, so to speak, as they say, or it doesn't matter if she's physically the most attractive as a man. Your responsibility to society is to provide and protect whatever woman you choose to be with. And so I think we're seeing responses that are rooted in these traditional ways of thinking, or they're rooted in these, and I don't think that they're fully traditional, because let's be honest, like, this idea of a high value man or making a certain amount of money, there are men, men back in the day who were traditional and thought like it's a man's job to provide and take care of and protect. Like, they did it whether they made $80,000 a year, $60,000 a year, $50,000 a year, or $100,000. Their income did not dictate what type of care they provided for their wives, in the sense of their responsibility that they took over their families and their households. And I think sometimes men said they couldn't do it all alone, so women worked and helped out in the families. But from the men who I have talked to who are 70, 80 years old, like, that never crossed their mind. So I think in some ways men are adapting, but their responses to it are not compliance, but a frustration and a reverse psychology. Like, women want all these things. Okay, well, why can't men have all these things? So the gender lines are being blurred, because more men and women are having conversations. You have women talking about how much money they make and why they don't need a man. And then you have men over here saying, why do I have to be the only one that takes care of a woman? Why can't a woman take care of me? And so these are some of the responses. Or you're getting the red pill community of men who are trying to instill those traditional views and have a way of manhandling the modern women as a response to what we're seeing. I think the conversation started with feminism. I think that it's a large part been dictated by the growth in social, political, emotional, and financial, economic needs and demands of women. And I think men are finding their way to respond. I think it's causing a gender war, so to speak. I don't know. Those are just my thoughts on it. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think the red pill community is a response to men's frustration with feminism? And let me know your thoughts. I'd love to hear them. Again, more videos to come on this topic. I do have a video I'm going to talk about addressing the main things that I hear in the red pill community and whether or not those are statistically sound, and providing you guys with those sources. And also just sharing whether or not you truly want a high value man. These videos are going to be coming up soon. Love you guys. I hope you're staying safe. God bless you. Good night.